And we're live. Okay. So we'll wait for a few people to get here before we really start. There are 3 reactions from people.
Oh, yes.
It usually takes a little while for the indicator to show that people have actually arrived. So we can be comfortable for a few more minutes. Okay, I usually like to wait until we're at least 20 people to start off so they don't miss anything important. Well, good evening, everybody. This is Joe Firestone for Real Progressives. It's Saturday night, okay, at 8 o'clock, and it's my regular show. And my guest for tonight is Lisa Ring, congressional candidate for the nomination of the Democratic Party in the Georgia 1st. She has been campaigning now for 9 months. And she has another 9 months to go. So I want you to give her a warm welcome. Indeed. She is a CFAR candidate, and she is a real progressive. And she has had some very hard times. And she has worked very hard, and she is well aware of the problems that people face. And what I would like to do tonight is to examine her platform in some detail, and give her a chance to tell her about it. From time to time, I'm going to ask some questions in order to clarify the platform. And I'm sure you'll have a lot of comments as we go along. We'll try to speak to those comments. Okay, if not immediately, then in a Q&A if we have time to actually get to that. So let's begin. Would you tell us about your platform, Lisa?
Absolutely. My platform is one that's really about balancing the inequalities that exist and that grow greater in our economics, in our freedoms throughout this country. In general, I think that it's time that we restore our voice as voters, as Americans, and stand up on the issues that directly affect us, because we have effectively lost our voice on every issue. And we do have a system where people are being neglected, people are being forgotten about, their needs are not being met. And it is unacceptable in this day and age that we are living in a country where people do not have access to health care or to decent paying jobs, and that they struggle every day just to take care of their families. My platform is, I picked the 3 most important issues in my district, in the 1st District of Georgia, but it is not only those 3 issues, because it's really across the board that changes need to be made to right the injustices that occur. So the first issue that I'm fighting for is Medicare for all. We've been fighting for a universal health care system in this country for over 100 years. It is time for us to catch up with the rest of the world and provide health care for every person from birth to death. And Medicare for All is a system that expands on a system we already have that is successful. And it makes sense economically when we talk about cutting out the waste that is in our healthcare system today. We can save people money just by implementing a single payer system. So that's the number one issue, and that is the number one issue in my district. Since
May I ask a question?
Sure.
Okay. But on your platform, you say that if we pass a Medicare for All bill, we'll save over $500 billion a year in administration costs.
Yes.
I wonder if that $500 billion a year claim is not a little too modest.
I believe that it actually is. Yes.
But the estimates, that I've seen, but depending on the assumptions that people make. In other words, for example, I usually make the assumption that we will eventually get down to the efficiency of, say, Canada, in this particular program. And that this would mean that our expenditures would fall from 17.4%, of GDP to roughly 11%, which is a saving, of roughly 1/3. So in that case, we'd be saving $1 trillion a year,
right,
at this particular program. And I also like to note, which I'm sure a lot of people in your district would like to learn about, the point that there's no deficit spending when it comes to Medicare.
Right.
It all comes out of your pocket, and my pocket. It may go to the federal government. Some of the healthcare costs, will go to the state government in terms of what is coming out of our pockets. Some of it will go to the insurance companies, and some of it goes to the co-pays and deductibles. But wherever it goes, it's coming out of our pocket each year because there's no deficit spending on it.
Right. And it's self-contained, and it costs us less than half of what we pay now, personally, for each individual.
Yes, so it's really a wonderful thing from the cost standpoint. But when people think of the savings, I think they have to start to think about, what would it mean if collectively we saved $1 trillion a year out of our pockets? Over 10 years, that's saving $10 trillion out of our pockets that can go to other spending or
Absolutely.
to saving.
Yes.
I don't think people realize that. I think they should.
Yes, I think you're right. And that is a message that we have to get out there, that a lot of progressive policies just make sense. Not only do they work in taking care of our needs, but they are just economically sensible. There is no reason that we should not implement a system that not only saves money, but saves lives and creates revenue to be used to meet other needs. So I agree with you. We have to take control of that message of what makes sense in this country and what we're capable of doing. Absolutely.
Yeah, one thing I find very compelling also about the healthcare situation is the number of fatalities that occur each year due to lack of insurance. Of course, the divorces and the bankruptcies and the foreclosures, are also very important. But the bottom line here is actually the fatalities. When we started trying to reform healthcare in 2009, we were dealing with a fatality estimate as of 2005 that was 45,000 people per year. And since the population of the United States had gone up from 2005 to 2009 by, at least probably 10 million people, okay, or something like that, that fatality figure was also going up because more and more people didn't have insurance over that particular period, and more people had come into the country, okay, either through birth, okay, or the immigration process. So we kept quoting, when I say we, I mean the progressive movement, kept on quoting the 45,000 fatalities per year. But there were not 45,000 fatalities per year. There were more each year, getting into 50,000 and even 55,000 by 2009. And you never heard that from anybody.
Right.
Okay. And also during the campaign, you very rarely heard about the fatalities. And when the Affordable Care Act was passed, you still didn't hear about the fatalities. It took 4 years to implement that. And in all those years, there were fatalities because they took 4 years to implement it.
Right.
Okay? And at the end, there was still roughly 30 million people who were not covered, which translates to fatalities close to 35 million a year by now. Once I totaled up the fatalities for this period, okay, at some point, and they came to something like, if I recall correctly, I've written it down. Okay, I have a blog on the subject, which I'll send you. But over this period from 2009 to 2017, we had roughly 47,000 fatalities per year, or something like a total of 430,000 fatalities, even after the passage of the Affordable Care Act.
It's staggering. And so, there are people who also have health insurance, but who can't afford care because their health insurance isn't covering everything that they need. So.
Okay, people don't really know this message, and they don't compare the fatalities from lack of health care to the fatalities from, say, 9/11.
Right.
Only 3,000 fatalities. Even after Obamacare was passed, okay, and was operating, there were 10 times as many due to lack of health insurance.
It's unacceptable, and I think that we aren't looking at the actual consequences of the policies that we have or lack of policies, and really how it is affecting. This is a matter of life or death.
It is,
and it's a matter of life or death for a large number of people.
Yeah, and I think our candidates have to begin to say that, and also have to talk about the real cost savings that are possible with this kind of program. I'm very glad to see that you're supporting HR 676, because that will not take a 3-year period to implement, but would be implemented in a single year.
Right.
Putting a stop to the fatalities.
Right.
Which the Bernie Sanders bill would not do. In other words, it would gradually put a stop to the fatalities, but it gives the health insurance companies the murderer's by spreadsheet time to adjust.
Right. Yeah, the two bills are very different. The House bill and the Senate bill are very different from each other.
Yes. And there were some things that are better in the Bernie Sanders bill and some things that are better in the House bill. If we could take the best from both of those bills, we'd have one hell of a bill.
Yes, I agree. And I
exactly.
think that's really what we need to focus on is let's just agree that we need a healthcare system that covers everybody, and that it needs to be done immediately because this is a crisis in our country. And then we can hash out the details of how we're going to do that. But first, let's agree that we're going to do it, and we're going to do it now. So,
Yes, we would agree on that, and we would agree that healthcare is a right of Americans.
yes, not a
And
privilege.
we have been actually denying them that right for so long that it's really disgusting.
It is.
Okay, let's move on to veterans and military families. I know that's very important in your district.
It is. We have 4 military bases in my district. One of the largest being Fort Stewart, an Army base. We have over 76,000 veterans, and we have military families that are currently on food stamps that don't receive a salary that they can live on. Yet we have a huge defense budget. That is not translating into pay for our service people. It's not translating into benefits. It's not translating into jobs and skills that can be implemented after serving. We have people who have been deployed 9 and 10 times who end up working at Home Depot for minimum wage because they cannot find other jobs that implement the skills that they have. Um, we have veterans that are homeless in our district. We have veterans that aren't getting the care that they need. All of this is unacceptable. I'm in a military family. I'm a military spouse and a military mom. My son is in training right now in Oklahoma. Um, I see firsthand what these families go through. We are sacrificing. Um, as a matter of fact, my husband serves in the Georgia Army National Guard, which means that he goes to drill once a month. And he actually ends up paying to serve our country because he has to pay for the gas to drive 2 hours there and 2 hours back. He's got to pay for his own uniforms. He gets no benefits, really. He could be paying for health insurance, but he gets it through work. So he gets no benefits serving, and the pay that he gets is very minimal. And he's not alone. We are promising people who serve our country certain benefits, educational benefits, and then we are not following through and giving them those educational benefits. We are cutting corners wherever possible. And it's not just with our military, it's in our country, it's working families that we are cutting corners and we are not meeting the needs of people in our country. And that's got to stop.
Okay, so how do you stop it?
How do you start? It's a matter of priorities, really. With every issue that I am fighting for, it is a matter of priorities. If we say that we honor our military, then we have to honor our military individuals. We don't just throw money at the military industrial complex and say we are good patriots and we are supporting our military. What we do is we take care of those families. We take care of those Gold Star families. I have a friend, Mrs. Patricia Barbie, who is a Gold Star wife. She lost her husband in Vietnam many years ago. They receive benefits. Those benefits have not gone up since 1993. Those are the benefits that families are living on. And her sacrifice was her husband. This is how we want to treat people who have sacrificed and served our country. It's unacceptable. And the service members who are serving now, they receive a bonus for signing up or re-enlisting, but they have taxes taken out of that bonus. I mean, what is the purpose of that? It seems that at every point where they could receive some type of a benefit or they could be shown some appreciation and some respect for the work that they do, they are not. They are taken for granted, and their families also are sacrificing.
Okay, so two questions. Why is this happening? And the second question is, what specifically do you propose to do about it?
This is happening because we are a hypocritical nation. Because we have these slogans that we like to throw out that are backed by not backed by reality. What I propose to do about that is really to speak the truth and to really start investing in people and in our communities. We have this divide, this false message, and I've seen it happen in the military because the people that my husband serves with, you've seen a division in this country of people who follow the current administration in the military. For some reason, President Trump has taken on this I'm strong with military and I support the military, I don't know, veneer, I guess. And the current representative, Buddy Carter, does the same thing. He talks about what he does with the military in his district. But when you look at it, they're really not doing a thing for the military. They're not doing a thing for the people who are actually serving. And what we have to do is take back that message and make investments, financial investments in people, and invest in making sure that we are providing for mental health care, that we are providing homes for our homeless veterans. We have a project here in Savannah, the Tiny Home Project, where they're building tiny homes in a community for veterans, which is a wonderful project, but it's mostly privately funded. They are fundraising to create this community, and it will house about 75 veterans. Well, there are a lot more homeless people that need to be taken care of and a lot more veterans that need to be taken care of. So we really need to put our money where our mouth is, providing housing, providing health care, providing decent pay. This is really how we're going to fight the issue, is by investing in people.
Do you have a proposal about what to do? Okay, and how much money should actually get appropriated by Congress in order to handle the problem?
I do not. I do not have the details hammered out of where the money would come from and exactly how much money needs to go to every service and every need. The thing that I understand what you say when you say that we should answer the question of how we're going to pay for things. We should have an answer. The thing that I've been trying to do with this campaign is really to focus on messaging. When you start throwing out numbers, there is a large percentage of the population that don't want to hear it. And they're not listening to the overall message of what can and cannot be done, or, essentially the overview of the direction that we need to move in. I've found that oftentimes when people ask me the question, so how are you going to pay for that? It's because they're trying to disprove whatever it is I'm saying. So it doesn't matter what I say to them.
You the question, how are you going to pay for it? What I'm going to be doing is to give you a way to pay for it.
And yes, and I appreciate that.
Take away the cost problems.
I appreciate that. What I'm trying to say is that what's very important, I've been trying to follow George Lakoff, that it is the messaging of progressives that really needs to be moved forward, and that's what people want to hear. If we're going to get bogged down in exactly dollar for dollar how much we're going to pay for this and how much we're going to pay for that, we're kind of missing the message.
I am not suggesting at all that we get actually bogged down in how we're going to pay for something.
Oh, I didn't mean to suggest that you were. I'm more talking about that person who asked me pointedly, how are you going to pay for that? It is generally a way for them to try to disprove whatever it is that I'm saying is a good idea.
It
Yes.
is. And we progressives get that question, but frequently, as a way of getting us to back off. And when we get into fighting for bills in Congress, the how we going to pay for it question gets translated into the pay-go rules, okay, of Congress. And then we're supposed to conform to the pay-go rules and to the CBO projections and to show that what we favor will be actually neutral with respect to the deficit over 10-year projections. Okay,
right.
All of this is nonsense that we have to be freed from.
Yes.
The federal government is the issuer of our currency. We are a currency sovereign, and therefore we can ultimately pay for whatever we need. Mm-hmm. We have to watch out for inflation, but we never have to care about a solvency question. So there's never a case where there's something that we are not able to afford in terms of the ability of our government to pay for it.
Absolutely.
There's only a question of whether we're spending too much, okay, in any one year.
Right.
Okay, that's a key question, but that's a separate question. It doesn't have to do with specific proposals. It doesn't have to do with justifying a specific proposal based on what it's going to cost. Okay. So anyway, what I would encourage you to do is to develop a proposal for veterans and military families across the country that you can go out with. Okay, and we'll discuss how to pay, not for just this, but how to pay for Medicare for all, and how to pay for a living wage, okay, and how to pay for the environment, okay, and immigration, how to pay for it all, okay. But before we do that, I would like to get into the rest of the platform, because I think it's very good and that people ought to hear it, okay. So let's move on to workers' rights and a living wage.
Absolutely. I live in Georgia, a right-to-work state. We are living in a time where the administration and every agency is really working to erode workers' rights. It's happened over a long period of time, but we are in a crisis situation where workers essentially have no rights, no right to organize, no right to fight for pay and for benefits. And the attitude is, you're lucky to have your job. We're going to pay you what we want to pay you. And if you don't like it, you go work somewhere else. Well, the thing is, there is nowhere else to work. There is nowhere else that you are going to get a living wage. And as far as a living wage goes, I signed on to the Fight for 15, but I don't believe that's anywhere near enough. I believe that that's a start. I think even in Georgia, an actual living wage is $18 to $23 an hour. So again,
Georgia 10th, who is running on what he calls a fair wage, and he's pegging that at $20 an hour.
Richard, yes.
Yes, Richard Dean Winfield. Yes. He is running on that. I've interviewed him. I've had already 3 interviews with him. Okay, and we've heard about his whole program in some detail. And of course, it is very detailed. But I think that his fair wage plank and his justification for it is very, very good. And I doubt that he'd mind if you borrowed it. I don't think he would mind at all. Okay, I see that, though, the fight for 15. Okay, and I'd like to see a fight for more than 15.
Yes.
Because, after all, generally speaking, when we fight for something, we in the end have to compromise on it.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
if we fight for 20, we might get 15. If we fight for 25, we might get 20. How things work in Congress. Okay, so you have the elimination of the right to work laws, and you want earned overtime and benefits such as paid family and medical leave, and sick days and vacation time, and assistance with child care.
Yes, absolutely. I've been traveling around the first district and going to many of the rural counties and the urban counties in my district, and talking to people who work with domestic violence victims, and talking to people who work with the homeless and so on, and seeing really what the top issues are. And the top issues are in this district are that we don't have transportation to get to work. We don't have childcare. So it makes it very difficult for particularly women to have a job and to care for their children when they can't get to where they need to go, and they have to leave work to take care of their children. We live in a country that we don't honor the fact that we are parents and we are raising generations of children under circumstances that make it difficult to give them all we can give them. We have to start investing in families and investing in workers, not expecting so much productivity, making them work, 2 and 3 jobs just to make ends meet, and not being able to care for their family or live lives of quality. We certainly deserve the benefits of being able to take care of a family member when they're sick and be paid and not lose our jobs.
Okay, one point here, but from the economic standpoint, when you work 2 jobs or 3 jobs, the only implication that has with respect to productivity is to reduce productivity. Okay, it's not to increase productivity. But the reason for that is the way productivity is actually calculated is you take the output and you divide it by the number of hours worked.
Right.
Okay, so it's per hour. In other words, that statistic is a per hour statistic. So therefore, if someone works for 12 or 16 hours, okay, as opposed to 8, that alone is not going to raise the productivity they have. In fact, it's likely to lower it because by the time they get to the 8th hour, even, they're probably going to be very, very tired.
Right. Very true.
Yeah. So there's
that. And it is unacceptable what we are doing to workers. 2 things that come to mind is not wanting to pay them for overtime work. There is just no excuse for that. And another is this legislation that allows employers to keep pooled tips and not even give tipped workers who are making less than minimum wage the tips that they earn.
Right.
It's just another wage theft that's happening.
It's legal. Approved by the Trump administration, right?
Yeah. So we're eroding the rights of workers every day, and we're giving them less and less and less and expecting them to get by. How do we expect to have a thriving economy if we're doing so? It makes no sense.
Yeah, I think the real answer is the people who are doing this don't expect a thriving economy. What they're trying to do is to grab as much as they can while they can before the economy collapses due to their efforts.
It's so short-sighted, though. How can you be that way? I don't understand. How can you just take as much as you want for now and not worry about what that's going to do later? You can't run a country that way. You might, if you're the current president, you might run a business that way, but I don't know how you would run a country that way.
I don't even know how you would run a business that way if you expect that business to last.
Right. Well, I don't think they do.
I don't
With
think they do
mergers and
either. And
acquisitions.
I don't think that Trump did in terms of his businesses.
Right.
He was always taking his businesses into bankruptcy, okay, and
Yes.
walking with as much money as he could. He was actually a very poor businessman.
Right. That's very telling too.
It is. It is indeed very telling. Okay, so the environment. What would you do with respect to the environment?
That has become the hottest issue lately because we are the coast of Georgia, and we have a representative who is very much open to the idea of energy independence and wants offshore drilling.
Oh boy.
Um, the people of Georgia, particularly the people who live on the coast, are up in arms about this particular issue. We love our coast. We love our shrimp. We love the beauty that we are surrounded by daily, and to think that we would open up our shores to explore for oil drilling is unforgivable. Not only is there no guarantee of oil, not only will it be costly, and if we do get oil, we will be exporting much of it. But the most important issue is that we should be moving away from fossil fuels to 100% clean, renewable energy anyway, because fossil fuels are a dying industry, and we must address climate change, and we must be leaders globally in addressing climate change. There is just no acceptable reason for exploring offshore drilling off the coast of Georgia, and people are angry about it. For a while, our representative, Buddy Carter, he was saying that he believed in offshore drilling, and then he said, well, he would rethink it. I think that now he's back to, he believes that that's the best option. And that is a problem with our representation, is that he is not actually representing the will of the people in the first district. I think that it goes beyond that, and if we would actually invest in solar and wind energies and be leaders in technology and sustainable energies, Georgia could be a leader in the world and in the country. We would be creating great paying jobs, and we would be responsible to our planet. I think that that's the way of the future, and that's how we are going to invest in our infrastructure and solve our environmental problems. And as far as environmental issues go, we have virtually no protections in the state of Georgia. Companies can pollute and be within the legal limit when they do so. So we have waterways that are polluted, and there are coal ash dumps here. We have so many issues here in Georgia, and the companies are not even violating law.
Yeah, you say in your platform you support HR 3671.
Yes.
So you're committed to that bill.
Yes, I'm committed to that bill because that moves us to 100% renewable energies by 2035. And 80% before then. And what it does, it's a very smart bill, because it doesn't just say that we have to make the transition. It says how. It says where we're going to put money for incentives and to help people and to create a workforce and to actually implement this all the way around as far as structure and workforce development goes as well.
Okay, so you are committed to voting for that bill.
Yes.
Or something similar. Okay, let's move to the immigration issue.
Okay. Did you want to ask me something specific, or you just want me to start talking?
I want you to start talking.
Okay. We, my argument has been that we are not representing the will of the people. When I have visions of going to Washington and representing the first district, the history major in me kicks in, and I think about the early days of our democracy when, unfortunately, it was all land-owning white men, but that they would make that journey to the Capitol to represent their district. And they were there to fight for the interests of the people who lived in their district, their economic interests, their part in the United States. And that's how I feel my role is. And I see myself as, when I become a congresswoman, as a part of history in representing the first district of Georgia. The first district of Georgia wants dreamers to be able to stay in this country. The first district of Georgia wants people to have a pathway to citizenship. We don't want a country that limits who can come to this country based on which country they come from, based on how much education or how much they make in their profession in their own country. In the United States, we are strong because we are a collection of talents of all different people from all places in the world. And there should be no limit to that. That is our history. Although we do have a history of also trying to keep people out. I think we really need to expound upon our strengths and make this country what it is. It is the land of opportunity. It is where people come to live their dream. And there is no right at this point in history for us to stop and say, well, we're not going to let anybody else in, or we're only going to let certain people in. Well, let's have a restructured immigration system that is fair and is workable and allows people a way to become citizens. We already have a vetting process to keep out people that we consider dangerous. And that vetting process is very extensive.
Okay, so for the dreamers, would you specifically support simply making them citizens of the United States, since they were schooled here, educated here, they grew up here?
I would, and most of them have started the paperwork. They started the process years ago to try to become citizens. So it doesn't make any sense to say, well, you did all this work all these years, but now you can't.
To make them citizens.
Yes. Yes,
okay,
I would.
That is very good to know. I think that's something a lot of us would support. Okay, and it might be good to come out, okay, and to say it.
Sure.
Okay, and then there are the details also with respect to a pathway to citizenship for their family members and for their parents and for their friends. And we need a process completely different from what we have now. Right. That some of the people have been waiting, 16 years?
Right.
Some ridiculous time to become citizens of the United States?
Yes. And I think that a lot of this also goes back to how we have gutted our government. We don't have the resources to deal with serving the people in this country. And we need to start reinvesting in our people, in our communities, and in our government. If we put the money back into different agencies so they can do their job, then they can actually process claims and get people where they need to go. I think that is what the problem is.
Great. Okay, I think that's also the problem. But in other words, each time we go over an item here, you say that you're in favor of reinvestment. Okay, and usually frequently anyway, the reinvestment is going to involve considerable money. So sooner or later, we are going to have to get to how you're going to pay for it type of question. Okay, let's move to education though now. Okay, because you have a wonderful platform with respect to education. Could you tell us about that, please?
Sure. Again, it's reinvesting in people. And I think that education is the number one need that people have other than healthcare. We have to really think about what we're doing to our children. I think the biggest danger that we face in this country is the privatization of everything, of our education, of our prison system, of our healthcare system. We have people who want to profit off of all of our systems by gutting the public systems that we have so that they can come in with their friends and their private systems and take over and say, you're not doing a good job, we're going to take this over, and then they're making a profit off of it. Well, that's what's
They're
happening.
making profit off of it, and often they're getting public subsidies.
Yes, absolutely. And
so they're involved basically in looting.
yes, they are.
They're looting.
They're looting our treasury as well.
Yes. When there's a public-private type of partnership, which all kinds of people are advocating these days, we need a public-private partnership. What usually goes on in these things is that the public bears the cost, okay, and the risk, and the private walks off with the profits.
Yes.
So basically, in those types of partnerships, the rule for the public is to keep its hands on its wallet,
right?
Because pocket is about to get picked.
Right. Exactly.
So and I'm very skeptical of those kinds, of partnerships.
And that is what's happening with our public school system. So we have the majority of kids who are suffering in public school systems that we are not investing in. They don't have the teachers that they need. They don't have the resources that they need. And we are allowing public monies to be shifted over to private schools and charter schools where, certain people are profiting from that. We really have to shift our resources so that we are investing in the public education of all of our children. And if somebody wants to pay more to send their child to a private school, that is their responsibility. That is not our responsibility. We have to provide the best educational system that we can to every child. And that starts with a universal pre-K program, which is very important. We have long waiting lists for these programs. They are expensive as well. The only reason my children went to preschool, 3 of the 4, one didn't go, was because their grandmother was a teacher and they got to go for free. So we have to really invest in our children, and that's all the way up through providing apprenticeships and trade options, trade school options when our kids are in junior high and when they're in high school. That's about tuition-free college and universities. Our educational system is something that we must invest in and strengthen because it is our future. Our children are the future of our country. Why would we want to deny our children an education?
Would you extend that to graduate school as well?
I had not thought of that, but yes, that makes sense. That makes sense to me. I would like to know more about it, but it certainly sounds like something I would get behind. Yeah.
Okay, well, there are students who are going to graduate schools, in other nations because those graduate schools are free.
Free, yes.
Yes, and there are some people who are going to Canada because they not only get free graduate school education there, but they also get living allowances under certain conditions.
Yes. I have a relative who is in college in Switzerland. She knows German, so she gets to go to school for free, and she works at Subway, and she makes a living wage working at Subway. So she's very happy and very well off, going to school for free and working, making a living wage in Switzerland.
Right.
Um,
And she gets paid a living wage in Switzerland because the law requires it.
right,
So
right.
Subway pays its people a hell of a lot more in Switzerland, probably 3 times the rate it pays its people here in the United States, right? The same
Yes,
corporation,
right.
right?
Because they can.
Yes, because they can.
Right.
Okay. Oh, also, by the way, just to loop back to, well, I guess we haven't talked about the job guarantee program yet. Okay, but we can get into a job guarantee program. So why don't we hold that, okay, for a couple of minutes? Uh, so you talk about relief from staggering student loan debts. What kind of relief did you have in mind?
Well, this is another thing that the details would need to be worked out for what was most beneficial for the largest number of people. But I think most specifically addressing the people who have been paying their student loans the longest, and providing relief to them first. And also maybe starting off with something incremental, also having to do with the people who are paying more of their income in student loans. And
Okay,
I'm
so
not just
right
talking about
now,
reducing, I'm sorry?
okay, so right now, somewhere between 80%, okay, and 90%, okay, of student loan debt, okay, is owned by the federal government.
Right.
So the question is, why not forgive it all?
I I would love to do that. I would love to do that. And I think that it's a possibility. But I think that
Why would you not do that? In other words, what are the reasons against it?
there is no good reason against it.
Okay. Okay. So I guess what I'm really asking you is why would you not come out, okay, and just advocate for that?
Yeah. Um, yeah, I see why you're asking that. And you're right. There is absolutely no reason why we couldn't just do that. And I can do that.
Okay, there might be political reasons, and political reasons might arise from the fact that people would say, oh, look, I finished paying off my student loan debt. I finished 5 years ago, and I paid off $50,000, okay, in student loan debt. And now here you're proposing simply to forgive everybody who still have student loan debt. And that's not fair to me. Okay, so the point is,
But
what he's saying is, I suffered through this. I suffered very, very badly.
but they say that about
I want
everything.
other people to suffer too. It's not fair to me.
Right. But they say that about, oh, I worked hard to be able to pay for my health care, and I work hard to receive the salary that I receive, and not everybody deserves to receive what I receive. And so they'll say that about anything.
Yes, they will. Yeah, they'll say that about anything. And so the point is, there are going to be some people who are going to be very, very happy with that. And there are some people who are not going to be happy with it. And it comes down to a situation where you have to do what's right. Okay. And we know that not only was the whole practice of student loan debt an ill-advised practice that after a period of time got into basically interest rates that were usurious considering the profits, okay, which the banks were making, okay, but also it was a situation uh, where a whole generation of people could not progress with their lives because they had the burden of student loan debt
Yes.
on them, and that had macroeconomic effects in the economy, slowing the economy down and contributing to a stagnant economy. And to lift the burden off all these people, is bound to be very stimulating for the economy.
Right.
Because that money would go elsewhere. And that's a very good reason to advocate for that it would contribute to creating a general prosperity in the country.
Yes. Yes, I agree with you.
And the final item you say you're in favor of is a society that tackles poverty in order to ensure our children are safe, healthy, well-fed, sheltered, and living in a thriving community. That's very good, but why does it come under the education heading?
Because that is an issue that really does affect education. We have teachers, we have schools in underserved areas where they're trying to teach kids who don't get enough food to eat. Kids who, live in situations that are crisis situations. We also have homeless children, children who are living in motel rooms, or they're living, 3 families to a house or to an apartment. They cannot learn to the best of their ability, and they cannot thrive in an environment where their needs are not being met. We have to tackle that income inequality and disparity if we want all of our children to have an opportunity to succeed. And I think that's an important issue when it comes to education. We not every child can be treated the same. Some have more needs than others, and we have to work as a community to meet the needs of every child, whatever that may be.
I quite agree. Okay, you have the category of international policy. Would you like to say a few words about that?
Sure. I think that that can all be summed up with diplomacy. Really, when you watch the news every day, you see the embarrassments that happen that are really a threat to our standing in the world and our relationships with all countries globally. And what we have to start doing is taking on the responsibility for what we say and what we do and what we support and what we are promoting in the world. I think that we have been arrogant to think that we can say and do whatever we want because we are the United States. As if we are to be a force in the world that works for a healthy planet that prospers for all people, we have to be leaders willing to respect other cultures and other nations and talk to them and come up with solutions for problems that are global. We can't do that if we're insulting them. Diplomacy is the number one issue, because if there is a dispute, we must be able to talk about it. We must be able to work through it and not automatically threaten a country or use our military might to get our way. That has happened for too long.
Well, that's looking towards the future.
Yes.
But what do we do now? We have military bases in 80 countries right now, or something like that.
Yes.
We have ongoing shooting wars in quite a few places that we know about, and in other places where we're not aware of the details of some fighting going on. So what do we have to do to stop the wars, and what would you do in Congress to facilitate that?
What we have to do is really, we have to use military action as a last resort and not a first step. We have to follow through.
Looking to the future. Okay, that's looking to the future. We have the military actions going on right now. What would you do about those military actions?
Well, we have to follow through.
In Afghanistan?
Yeah, we have to follow through on the decisions we've already made. We already decided we were going to leave Afghanistan. Now we actually have to do it. We knew a long time ago that we weren't going to win in Afghanistan, that there is no winning, and it is something that we need to bring our troops back home. There is no point to continuing in Afghanistan, but instead, what we're doing is sending more troops. We have committed.
So how could you facilitate bringing home the troops from Afghanistan?
Well, it's following through on what was already decided years ago. We had a
I
plan for how we were
understand.
going to pull out and reduce our numbers to the point of not having our troops in Afghanistan.
Yes, but I
And then that was
understand. What I'm trying to get at, okay, what I'm asking is, how would you, as a congressman, facilitate that? After all, Congress has the power of the purse. And right now, it is Congress that is funding the
Oh,
overseas
I
war.
see what you're saying. Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't understand. Yes, absolutely. If we are not funding the war in Afghanistan, there will not be a war in Afghanistan. Um, and that is the power of Congress in allocation of funds.
So the
Absolutely.
question is, how would you join with other Congress people to try to end these wars?
Well,
I mean, it
I
might
think
come down to actually voting against a new version or reforming, revising the old version of the authorization to use force.
right. I think that as far as working with other congressmen, we right now have we have congress people who have said that we need to leave Afghanistan. We have people who are very vocal on that issue. We have Tulsi Gabbard and Bernie Sanders, and we have legislators that do want to move forward with this. And what we're seeing when we're this year, this wave that we're talking about of progressive candidates, what we're looking to do is to sweep into Congress and to make these changes that we've talked about for so long. The door has been opened by these leaders who have been outspoken. Now what we have to do is in numbers be able to work together effectively to make this happen. So I'm confident that we are going to be able to do that.
Okay, and so would you help to organize this in Congress if you were
Sure.
elected?
Yes. I would lead in whatever way I could lead on any legislation that is going um, to move things forward in a progressive way and benefit this country. Um, it is time to change the direction that we have been moving in, and I think that this is the year that that is going to happen.
Okay, so let us shift to trade. Okay, we're involved, still involved, in actually negotiating a number of trade agreements. Uh, what kinds of trade policies and what kinds, okay, of trade agreements would you vote for in Congress?
I would vote for revisions of the trade policies that we have. I was very vocal against the Trans-Pacific Partnership. I would be in favor of trade agreements that were set up in a way that helped working Americans, that protected working Americans and their interests, and not the interests of the corporations who actually are making money off of these trade policies and then not held accountable through any regulating agency. What I would push forward is trade legislation that protects our economy, that protects our workers, and gives us the mechanism to make sure those protections are in place and can be implemented. As it stands now, we lose on every front with our trade policies.
Okay, speaking of the TPP itself, and also the TTIP and the TISA, okay, as well. the other trade agreements that were on the table at the same time, okay, in the Obama administration, and that to some degree are still on the table here, even though Trump, of course, said that he was opposed to the TPP, but he's still trying to negotiate certain agreements that are perhaps successors to the TPP and that involve some of the same kinds of clauses in them. So I'd like you to be a little more specific about the provisions of the TPP that you did not like.
Okay, it's been a while since I reviewed the TPP, but the provisions, so I'm not going to be specific about the actual clauses of the provision, but just in general, the fact that we were not protecting the trade of our country. We're not protecting the rights of workers. Basically, what we were doing is protecting the interests of profit makers, and allowing them to.
Right, but this was largely done through a specific clause, which has gotten into many trade treaties. Okay, it's in the WTO treaty we have now. Okay, it's in NAFTA. It's in the Korean treaty. Okay, it's in I forget, but there are some 80 treaties. Okay, all right, most of them of a bilateral nature that has a version of this particular clause. It's called the Investor State Dispute Settlement Clause. Okay, the ISDS clause.
The arbitration.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. The arbitration by a corporate court, an international corporate court, whose findings, in other words, what corporations can do is they can go to this court and they can sue national governments for compensation for potential profits,
right,
that they say have been lost by changes in the law in the host nations since the treaties were passed. Okay, since the treaty was passed.
Right.
Okay, and so then they can get a decision from a corporate court. Okay, and it is a corporate court in the following sense. All the people who get appointed to these courts are corporate lawyers that at one time or another are likely to represent the corporations they are ruling on, if not as individuals, then certainly collectively. Okay, and so then they can make decisions about the damages that must be paid by the countries that are being sued under the treaty. And then there is no appeal from those decisions to the Article 3 courts of the United States.
Right.
The Article 3 courts of the United States include all the courts of the United States, including the Supreme Court of the United States. They're called the Article 3 courts because the authority for them comes from the Constitution of the United States, from the highest authority. Okay, and so these treaties supposedly set up other courts outside of the Article 3 courts that are not subject to the Constitution of the United States. So one might say that the ISDS clause is an unconstitutional violation of the sovereignty of the United States.
Yes.
Okay, but in opposing these treaties, I never hear that said. In other words, it's often said it's no good because it's going to violate the environment, or it's going to hurt the workers and violate the rights, okay, of workers or the rights of our local governments. But it's almost never said that these treaties undermine the national sovereignty of the United States.
Right.
Now, strangely and ironically, one of the people who was most vocal in saying that, and one of the people who consistently voted against the trade treaties, was actually Jeff Sessions. His opposition to the TPP and the trade treaty was based on the idea that these were violations of the sovereignty of the United States. And he was remarkably consistent for years about this, until, of course, he got appointed to the Trump administration.
Right.
And now he does whatever Trump would like him to do. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, all right. Okay. But anyway, that's something to talk about when you're talking about these kinds of treaties, because people who don't care about the environment or don't care about our workers or don't care about the lost jobs do care about the sovereignty of the United States.
Right.
I mean, when you start talking about violations of sovereignty, they might tend to listen to you. Okay, so you have a few other items on the platform. Would you like to stay longer?
Sure.
We've still got 40 people who are hanging in here, okay. Who are listening to us.
All right.
And so
I'm learning a lot from you. So thank you.
Okay, so women's rights. This is one of the most comprehensive items in your platform. So can you tell us about that?
Sure. It covers really a number of issues: equal pay, women's reproductive health, a woman's right to choose. If you consider the things that are happening daily and the rights of women are again being eroded, it is unacceptable that we are fighting for rights that some that we've already gained, like the right to choose. We're fighting just to keep those rights. We are living in a hostile time for women, and considering this year that women are running for office in record numbers, this is something that we will move forward with in this country. Also, it's about time for us to pass the Equal Rights Amendment. So I believe that that's something that can happen.
Yes, it certainly is. That's a bit of unfinished business that we need to finish.
Right.
Post haste. Okay, you've also got a platform on LGBTQIA rights.
Yes. That is particularly relevant to Georgia. We just passed in the state Senate a bill limiting the rights of the LGBT community. What it does is it allows discrimination of students who identify as LGBT and those who want to adopt, and the providing of health care. Which is, again, in this day and age, I can't believe that we are going backwards in equal rights, human rights, civil rights. This is about equality for every person and dignity for every person. A person's rights should not be limited based on who they are.
Okay, and so how will you fight for this if you get to Congress?
Well, there are numbers of pieces of legislation that address this issue. There's one in particular, and I'm sorry I don't remember the number, but it calls for an extension of protection under the law for people who identify as LGBTQ, because it just continues to private establishments, but public areas, the right to not be discriminated against based on anything. And I think that bill also extends
HR 2282.
Okay. Yes. Thank you.
It's on your platform.
Right. There is so much to remember. And,
I know there is. I know there is. All these laws and all these numbers.
yes, yes. But it's the basic idea that's important. No, really, the erosion of rights is something that I'm not going to allow to happen. Not while I serve, anyway. Um, it is unacceptable to me that
You're
we
not
should be
talking
going.
of but the erosion of rights. You're talking about the expansion of those rights, or the
Yes.
full realization, okay, of those rights.
Well, it's really
Because
twofold because we're doing both at the same time.
yes.
Yes,
Okay.
as we are
So,
not where we need to be with equality, at the same time we have people who are trying to take us backwards. So it's not
okay.
only fighting to
So
protect what we have, but it's also moving
let
forward.
me pose you a tough question, but it's the kind of question we see every day, okay, in Congress. So you're in Congress and you come upon a situation where there's a debt ceiling crisis or something like that, or some other kind, okay, of artificial maneuver which the Republicans are using uh, to create a crisis where they can go after things favored by Democratic constituencies, of one sort or another. And a government shutdown is pending from the debt ceiling crisis. Okay, in order to get out of the debt ceiling crisis, one of the things the Republicans want, okay, is for the Democrats to give up on their pushing about legislation to support LGBTQ rights. So the question is, would you refuse to vote for the compromise legislation in that situation, which was absent the clause for protecting LGBTQ rights? Okay, so I raised that question with respect to LGBTQ rights, but I also raised that question with respect to women's rights, because one of the things that happened with the Affordable Care Act is that Obama and also the Democrats compromised choice out of that bill and subjected it to an even worse version of the Hyde Amendment.
Right.
In order to corral some Democratic votes that they needed to get to pass the bill. There was a coalition that was led by a guy named Bart Stupak, who is no longer in Congress, but thank God. But he was joined by a variety of other Democrats, including some fairly liberal ones, supposedly liberal ones, like actually Marcy Kaptur, to compromise the choice of women in this context to have an abortion if they so desired. That was written out of the bill as something the federal government could support. So the question is, if you saw that happening, how far would you be willing to go to compromise?
I would not. I would not compromise our rights. I think there's a twofold issue here. Number one, attaching moral moral issues to a budget is is not something that should be done. We should be able to separate issues and really be addressing the one issue that we need to be addressing. If that is having a working budget, then that's what the issue should be. If you are pushing legislation that is proposing a certain morality for our country, that is a separate matter. And if you want to get that legislation introduced, then you do so. But no, I'm not willing to compromise anybody's rights in order to keep the government running. So I would not vote to compromise.
Okay, so I posed a difficult question, and you answered it very directly. And actually, we need that kind of specificity from our candidates because we need to know what our candidates will do in typical crisis situations that they get to in Congress. And so if we really want to change our situations, we have to get down to specifics like these.
Right.
And I think we have to support people who will stand by their principles when a moral issue comes up.
Yes, I agree. And I think that see, I never wanted to be a politician. I'm not doing this because this is my career choice. I have 4 grown children. I have, lived a life that I'm very happy with. The reason that I'm doing this is because I want to change things. So I have nothing to lose by standing for what I believe is right and really working for the good of the people who elect me to represent them. I'm not there to make deals and to gain favor. I'm there to pass laws that are actually going to better our lives. So I'm at an advantage. I feel like I have nothing to lose.
Okay. So let's move on to the next item. It's a very important one, criminal justice reform.
Yes, I'm a former corrections officer. I was also the executive director of an anti-recidivism program that was very successful. We only had a 20% recidivism rate. And it was successful because we actually took the time to work with parolees to help them with life skills, in obtaining jobs, in getting treatment, paying fines, and doing whatever they needed to do to be a part of society and not to continue their punishment and make it impossible for them to actually succeed outside of prison. We have set up a system that not only disproportionately punishes a certain segment of our population, but also puts them in a cycle that they can't get out of. We put them in a cycle where we're taking away their rights, we're taking away any chance of them moving ahead in life and living the best life that they can live, and most of it is financial. When somebody has been convicted of a crime, not only do they serve the time, but they also have to pay fines, they have to pay restitution, and they have a record that is going to make it in our economy even harder to get a job, if at all, or to get an education, if at all. And really puts people who may have been at a disadvantage to begin with at an even greater disadvantage. And what do we do? What do we do then? We have to have a system that is humane. We have to also our court systems do away with things like minimum sentencing, really put it in the hands of a judge and a jury to decide what this person did and what the appropriate punishment or the appropriate treatment is for whatever that crime may be. I think we as a society need to start thinking about things, and we need to start thinking of people and as individuals that may need some help or may need some guidance or just may not be as equipped as we are to to be contributing members of society. And we have to stop this, school to prison pipeline that we've created that is an endless cycle that we can't get out of. Just like we have the most guns in the world, we have the most incarcerated in the world. It's not something that we should be proud of. We're doing something wrong, and we need to fix it and be a more humane society.
Okay, so of course, two key questions, arise. And of course, there are a lot more than two, but just ones that come to mind immediately. You say you're for unconstitutional forfeiture laws.
Yes.
Okay. And I take it you're talking about civil asset forfeiture.
Yes. Assets can be seized without any charges made. They don't actually have to prove that the person they're accusing of being a drug dealer, they don't actually have to arrest them, and they don't have to follow through on the charges. But they lose everything. They lose their property, their families. There are cases where the person who was a suspect was actually killed or died in the process, and their families lost everything because their assets were seized. How is that fair? It seems that we have not only do we have a prison for profit system, but we also at times have a law enforcement for profit system that is unfair and really takes away the rights of citizens.
Right, but what you say here is not only that it's unfair, but that it's unconstitutional.
Oh, definitely, yes. Yes.
Well, it seems unconstitutional to me, and it seems unconstitutional to you, but I believe the Supreme Court has upheld the practice, so that to them it seems to be constitutional. So, what would you do to stop this when the Supreme Court seems to have ruled against stopping it?
I would have to read the details of the ruling, because they most likely have allowed it in certain circumstances that I think is not the circumstance that it is being used widespread.
Yes, that is probably right. Let me tell you about something else also. If you go to Article 3, Section 2 of the Constitution, what that article is concerned with is the direct jurisdiction of the Supreme Court and the appellate jurisdiction, of the Supreme Court as well. And the end of that clause is an exceptions clause. And the reason why it's called that is because it provides Congress with the power to name exceptions, specific types of laws and laws, which the Supreme Court will not have appellate jurisdiction over, so that you could pass a law and place an exception in the law, which would actually prevent the Supreme Court from reviewing the law and declaring it an unconstitutional law. In certain areas, in many ways, we have a Supreme Court now which looks extreme to many of us, if not to most of us. And both in this area and also to get to another area, you don't have anything in your platform that deals with campaign finance law. I noticed. Campaign finance, which is kind of a hole in the platform, because that's such an important issue now in terms of explaining why the people can't get what they want.
Absolutely. I agree with you. And it is something that I have addressed as a candidate. It is just not on my website yet. This has been a kind of an overwhelming journey of how to run a campaign. And as a first-time candidate, if you look at my social media and you look at what I've said, I have certainly addressed the issue. It is just not a page on my website, which I will take care of that. We're adding pages.
If Congress is going to do something about this, the usual solution, which is to pass a constitutional amendment, which might take 6, 7, 10 years to get through, or generations, like the Equal Rights Amendment, to get through. That's not really a practical solution for this year and for next year. Okay, so we need an interim, very practical solution to give the constitutional amendment time to get through. And so if you have good campaign finance bills in mind, and you can join with others in Congress to pass those bills, and they contain an exceptions clause, you can stop the Supreme Court from overturning those bills. Now, I told Tim Conover about it. At least he tells me that he picked it up, from things I said, that he picked up on the exceptions clause, of Article 3, Section 2. And he's a law prof. And as a law professor, he reviewed Article 3, Section 2. And he says it can be applied in the way that I suggest, that the Supreme Court could be stopped from actually reviewing campaign finance laws that invalidated the previous findings they made. And so there would be a way to exclude big money from politics using congressional laws that had that kind of exception in them. So that might be an interesting thing to include in your platform as you go forward.
Yes.
The other thing I noticed, which was not on your platform, which I thought was, you just sounded like someone who would really be in favor of this, is a proposal for a federal job guarantee. I think I mentioned this in connection with the fair wage earlier. The thing to notice about the fair wage, of $20 an hour, or any federal job guarantee wage, is that it, if passed, would set a standard. It would set a de facto minimum wage standard for the whole country. Simply because the minimum wage would be the wage that a federal job guarantee program would actually put forward, because if a private employer proposed to pay less, then someone could easily say, I'm not going to work for you anymore. I'm going to go work for the job guarantee program. So pretty soon, employers would not be able to get any workers unless they paid more than the fair wage under the federal job guarantee program. So that's one reason to have a federal job guarantee program, But another reason is you've called for good jobs at a fair wage, but for military veterans. Well, if you are in favor of a federal job guarantee at a fair wage, this would not only apply to military veterans, it would apply to everybody, but of course it would apply to military veterans as well.
Right.
And of course, if you go forward with single-payer health insurance, that would apply to military veterans and their families as well. And that would be a program where you can go see actually most any provider in the country, because at that point, if there's a Medicare for All program, very few doctors are going to opt out of that program.
Right.
So you might need VA healthcare for special things, like for treatment, okay, of the kinds of wounds, okay, that occur in war, or the kinds of surgeries that are done for that sort of injury, or the kinds of services that are appropriate for treating essentially PTSD, okay, or things like that. But generally speaking, for the ailments that our veterans get, they could use the Medicare for All system, same as everybody else. No
Right.
copays, okay, and deductibles, and great doctors. That is the doctors we want to use. We'd actually have a choice, which would pretty much apply, okay, to all our doctors, because almost everybody would be in the program, but from the provider side. So if you went for a healthcare program like that, okay, and you went for a job guarantee at a fair wage, then that would provide for full employment and for good jobs when people got out of the service. Jobs that would make use of their training, make use of their skills, but also deliver things local communities would need, because the job guarantee program actually provides for federal payments directly to the participants in the programs, but the programs would be defined by local authorities and by the participants in the program themselves. Incidentally, while we're talking about this, you probably know that our U3 and U3 unemployment statistics don't reflect the true unemployment picture in our country, because many of those who would like to be employed, would like to have a full-time job, have dropped out of the labor force.
Right.
At the height of the economy during the Bush administration, we had a labor participation rate of 67%. Now we have a labor participation rate of 63%. Roughly, there are 11 million people who would like jobs that are not counted in the U3 or the U6. When you add the U3, U6, and those 11 million people, it comes up to 24 million people that still need full-time jobs. And the only way to guarantee them full-time jobs is with a federal job guarantee program. And it wouldn't even really cost that much.
Right.
Even at the $20 an hour, it would probably cost, even at the beginning, no more than $650 to $700 billion a year. And of course, as the private sector fully recovers from the stagnating economy that we still have, people would be hired off the job guarantee program to go into the private sector, lowering the amount we would spend on the job guarantee program. And in addition, even if we're spending $650 billion to $750 billion a year on the job guarantee program, there are a lot of social safety net items that we would no longer be spending on. In other words, the social safety net programs would still be there. Job guarantee doesn't affect any of those. But at the same time, the people participating in the safety net programs would be much, much less, because they would have full-time jobs and would not need the social safety net programs, including disabled people. In other words, there are disabled people that can easily hold down full-time jobs, but can't get them in our economy.
Right.
But they would participate, and they would not be involved in the safety net then. In other words, they'd be able to provide for themselves. So that's just the thing. And I missed that actually from your platform. If you
Yes,
go to, uh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say that it's not in my platform, and that my candidacy has been an ever evolving thing. As I talk to more people and I learn more, I adjust what it is that's going to meet their needs. So I appreciate you sharing with me your ideas and how they can be implemented and how they make sense. That gives me the strength to push forward with the policies that will actually affect change.
Okay, well, thank you very much. There is something else that I'd like to introduce you to. You still have two platform items to discuss, which is racial justice and gun violence, and both of those are important. So before I introduce you to the final thing I'd like to introduce you to, I'd like you to talk to those items.
Okay. Well, when it comes to gun violence, that is another issue that has been of importance lately, and it's not it's not just one issue, and we're talking about more than one issue here. We're talking about the fact that we have not uh, implemented any gun protections in our society, and it is long past overdue. But we're talking about two problems, and one of them is mass gun violence, and the other is gun violence in our local communities, which are really two different issues. The way that we can combat the problem with gun violence in our country is really kind of a three-step system. I think the first thing is to start passing sensible protections. Um, this involves, as I said, I live in Georgia. Our gun laws are very lax here in Georgia. You only have to do a background check with a gun purchase if you are a licensed dealer. But you are allowed to sell a gun to a neighbor or over the internet with no background check. Um, that is something that needs to change. There should be a universal background check system for every gun purchase. And we have to start really banning military style weapons, high capacity magazines, and all the things that are unnecessary to civilians. So that's one aspect, having a culture of gun safety and having training and having people really be responsible if they're going to own a gun for their actions and for their gun. But there are two other aspects, and one is what we've been talking about, that is investing in communities. We are not investing in our educational system, in our recreational systems, in our social service agencies, and people are falling through the cracks because we're not investing in our government, we're not investing in our people, in our communities, and that is a problem. And we saw that with the incident that happened in Florida. But the third aspect is really having community programs that involve violence intervention. And this is where we're talking about local gun violence, really preventing violence by having intervention programs in hospitals and in communities that are run by community leaders, run by church leaders and other parents in the community who take responsibility for our children and say, I'm going to look out for you because, you're a member of my community and I care about what happens to you, and really paying attention to what a person is going through, and particularly a child in life. I think if we put those three components together, the violence intervention, investing in our communities, and having sensible protections, we can follow through. As an example, Richmond, California, and I have this on my website, they at one point had the highest gun violence incidence in the country. They implemented sensible protections. They also had violence intervention programs, and they reduced their gun violence by over 75%. that is something we can do nationwide. Another issue that we often don't talk about when it comes to gun violence is that most of the incidents are suicides. Twice as many incidents. There are twice as many suicides and homicides. This
Good
speaks
point.
to our mental health care system, our lack of it, and the availability of guns. Because if it is harder to get guns, oftentimes people who are in that situation, if it is delayed and they're able to think about it, they're able to work through whatever is causing them to be suicidal in the first place, and lives are saved that way. This is really about doing the research we need to do, investing in this as a problem that we as a society need to deal with, and tackling it on all levels. So those are some of the issues. And when it comes to racial justice, it is time for us to do something about racial justice in this country. We have, we live in a society that lives a lie. That we have come so far and that we are not racist anymore. And the problem is that our racism is institutionalized. Our racism isn't necessarily those white nationalists who are extreme and violent. Our racism is in our segregated school systems, where our public schools are failing, but our private schools are doing well. The problem of racial justice has to do with our incarceration system, which disproportionately affects people of color. Our racism has to do with the unemployment rate, which is twice as high for a black man than a white man. There are so many injustices that we need to tackle, and it's not that we have to tackle the problem all the way around as a nation, but we have to be particularly sensitive to how people of color and black communities are more affected than other people who have more opportunities, because they are not subject to a system that is systemically racist.
And so you would be for legislation to get rid of the prisons that are run by private businesses, for profit.
I only heard half of what you said, but I am very much against for-profit prisons. Yes.
Right. Very much against it. And you would vote for legislation that stopped that, I take it.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
Simply stop. Right? Okay. Okay. There's another area here too, and that is with respect to racism, as it is affected by debt collection practices. Okay, our debt collection practices involve things like really sending people to jail for debt by setting up the situation such that, okay, and this is especially true for poor people, and especially true for people of color, also not only blacks but Hispanics as well, that they get caught in a system where they don't know when or how or what will happen when they go to court. They end up not showing up in court, sometimes because they're never properly notified that they have to appear in court. And the result of that is then they are imprisoned for contempt of court, when it's really about they're not being able to come up with the debts, okay, that they owe.
Right.
And then they end up staying in prison for some time until someone can get up the bail to get them out. Usually the bail is the size of their debt. So they have to pay their debt in bail. And then when they get out, they still owe the debt. there's no relief for the debt at
And
all.
fine.
It's still owed by them. Okay, and they end up getting on this treadmill and going to
Mm-hmm.
prison again and again and again because of the way we subject people to debt collection systems. Now, this is really fairly recent. There were some hard times that I was going through in 1990 and also 91. And I never experienced anything like that. Okay, there was just a completely different system then in relation to negotiating with your creditors than there seems to be now. Okay, it seems to be highly punitive now. It seems to have evolved since the 90s to be in line with a neoliberal approach to debt collection, which is very, very punishing to debtors.
Yes.
Just in terms of ordinary debt and civil judgments for debt. You get involved in a civil judgment for debt, and you can easily find yourself losing your liberty even though there were no criminal charges.
Right.
And you committed absolutely no crime. This has to end also. And
Yes,
would
it does.
probably be good if this were an item on your platform as well. So let's get to the final thing that I wanted to say to you. Okay, from the viewpoint of the Constitution, there is Article 1, Section 8. Article 1, Section 8 says that Congress has the power to coin money. Over a period of time, that has been interpreted by Congress, okay, by the courts, as by Congress having the blanket rights to create money, not only to coin money, but to actually create paper money, currency, which evolved into the age of electronic money and the power to mark up checking accounts and savings accounts with reserves, okay, they're called, which are really just additions to account balances, okay, or the account balances themselves. Okay, so there's the coin money, there's the paper money, okay, and there's the reserve money created by the federal government. Now, these days, 97% of the money that's in the system is reserve money. It's not actually paper currency or coin money in terms of face value of the money. So, over time, what Congress did was to delegate its authority to create money to two agencies. One is the executive branch, of course, and the Treasury Department, okay, and the Mint, and the Bureau, okay, of Engraving and Printing in D.C., okay, in Washington. Okay. And the other institution was the Federal Reserve, started, okay, in 1913, and the Federal Reserve banks have the authority of Congress to mark up checking accounts with reserves created out of thin air by the Federal Reserve banks in order to perform the functions of the Federal Reserve, which relate primarily to regulating the interest rates in the economy, okay, and which also have to do with the regulation of the banking system. and all the banks that belong to the Federal Reserve System, which is actually most of the banks in the country. The Federal Reserve also performs various functions involving liquidity, trying to prevent insolvency crises in the banks, and trying to prevent a collapse of the banking system. They haven't always done that well. In other words, at the time of the Depression and at the time again of the financial crash, okay, of 2008. But they are supposed to prevent those kinds of things. They're supposed to prevent things like the failure, okay, of the Lehman Brothers Bank that actually precipitated the crisis, okay, of 2008. All right. So the way things work in our government is that Congress still controls the purse strings, even if it doesn't control the creation of money in the purse, even though it may have delegated the creation, okay, to other agencies. It still controls the purse strings, what can be spent and what it can be spent on. Okay? And it does this through the passage of the appropriations bills and the continuing resolution bills in Congress. Okay? And these bills say what the executive can spend money on, and how much money it can spend. Okay. It also regulates from afar what the Fed could do, because it specified the legal functions of the Fed, okay, and its limits. Okay. For example, the Fed is not supposed to do any fiscal policy. It's only supposed to regulate the system of money, okay, and the interest rates, okay, and also theoretically the money supply. But it's been proven long since that under the present system it cannot really regulate the supply of money. What it can regulate is the interest rates. Okay, so it has then fairly limited functions, okay, in that sense. But the spending functions are delegated by the Congress to the Treasury. One thing the Congress has not done, though, is when it mandates spending to the Treasury, well, it tells the Treasury what to spend. And when it tells the Treasury how much to spend, it does not at the same time actually provide the funds with which the Treasury can obey its orders. So the Treasury has certain tools. Whoops. Oh, there you are. You slipped away. Okay, so you slipped away for a second, so I can get you back. Okay, so the Treasury... yeah, I mean, I'm sure it wasn't. It probably was just a system. Sometimes, okay, it drops people. It's just happens. Okay, so anyway, okay, the Treasury Department has certain tools to get funds into its accounts. What those tools do is they provide a warrant for the Federal Reserve to exercise its power to add to the Treasury spending account at the Federal Reserve, to actually add the new high-powered money which is required for the Treasury to spend out. In other words, the Treasury can only legally spend a certain kind of money. It can't spend money created by the ordinary banks. It can only spend reserves or currency or coins that are created either by the Fed or, in the case of coins, by itself. Okay? Generally, how it spends these days is by marking up accounts in the private sector. In other words, it adds to reserves in the private sector once the Fed fills up its own account, okay, with reserves. So, how does it get these reserves into its account? Okay, the first way, of course, okay, is that it taxes. Okay, now the taxes don't fund the spending, but what the taxes do is they allow the Federal Reserve to drain money out of the private sector. When the accounts in the private sector are marked down for the taxes, at that point, money is destroyed in the private sector, making way for the Fed to create some new reserves that the Treasury can use to spend. The same thing happens with bond sales. In other words, that's a second way. Okay, so the Treasury can get money in its account because it sells bonds. Those bonds do not finance, okay, its spending, but when the accounts of the bond buyers are marked down, the money is destroyed in the private sector. And again, the Fed acts in the same way. As part of the process, the money is destroyed in the private sector, and then new high-powered reserves are created by the Fed within the Treasury spending account. Now, it's difficult to explain this to people. In other words, you're not going to go on the campaign trail and explain this and easily explain to people that taxes and bond revenues do not actually fund spending. That's really the Federal Reserve that is funding the spending because it has the power to create those reserves, which has been granted to it by the Congress, so that looking at it both directly, okay, and indirectly, it's really the Congress that is funding the spending. You won't be able to easily explain that to people.
Right.
And so people will not learn that the size of the debt really doesn't matter because Congress can always get the Federal Reserve to create enough money to pay off the debt as it falls due, okay, and can stop any financial crisis that could be experienced by the federal government, and that there are no solvency problems for the federal government. That's going to be an educational argument that will take years to spread through the population. But there is something you can do immediately to remove the problem, and that is that with every appropriations bill, you can add one clause, two sentences. Okay, I put those up on the screen. You may not be able to read them, okay, at this point too clearly, but I'll explain. What the first clause does is, when this clause is attached to an appropriations bill, it orders the Federal Reserve to create the reserves necessary to spend the appropriation in the Treasury spending account as soon as it passes the bill. And what the second clause does is it orders the Federal Reserve, which Congress can do, of course, okay, because the Federal Reserve is its creature, okay? So it can order the Federal Reserve to also create the money the Treasury needs to pay off any Treasury debt falling due during the period of the appropriation or the CR bill. So two things. What the second sentence does is it pays off the debt as it falls due. Okay, so eventually all the debt is gone. there's no more need for the federal government to carry any debt. The reason why that's important is because when you get into the how you're going to pay for it question, it's always about how can we run deficits? We can't afford the deficit spending because it's going to add to the debt. And look at the size of this debt. It's $20 trillion. Our grandchildren are going to have to pay for it. Everybody's going to have to suffer. It amounts to $60,000 an individual. We all have this debt. We're all on the hook to pay for it. Well, first of all, we're not all on the hook to pay for it. It was incurred by the federal government, and the federal government is on the hook to pay for it. It's on the hook according to the 14th Amendment. It cannot default according to the terms of the 14th Amendment. So the federal government is on the hook to pay for it, but the federal government can get the money to pay for it in this way, with Congress simply ordering the Treasury in every appropriations bill and every CR bill to give the Treasury the money it needs to pay off the debt. So these two simple sentences, which get attached to both short bills like H.R. 676, which is only 35 pages, or very long bills like the Affordable Care Act. I think that one was 2,300 pages, okay, if I recall correctly. Whatever the size of the bill, these two sentences, maybe half a page in these bills, can counter any possible financial objection. Now, there might be other objections that would come to the fore. Inflation. Okay, so what are we going to do with the tax money? Okay, are we going to give that to Treasury too? And the answer to the question is no. Well, we aren't going to give it to the Treasury. The Fed will destroy that money as it comes in because it ordinarily does destroy it anyway. And secondly, it has to destroy it to control inflation. So we give it the authority in one sentence to destroy it. Okay? So this is your answer to how you're going to pay for it. Put this in every bill, and people can't say, there's a debt problem. I can't fund this because there's this huge problem, huge problem of the national debt. And with the first sentence, they can't say, well, this deficit is going to be too large. The Treasury won't be able to get the money from the private bond markets. Yes, the Treasury will, because it won't be going into the private bond markets again, and it will be getting the money that Congress orders it to spend directly from the Fed, because Congress is now going to do what it should have been doing all along, which is to say, it should have been placing the money in the Treasury account that it orders the Treasury to spend.
Right.
I mean, what's this business about saying, hey, go spend $3.8 trillion this year, but I'm not giving you any money to do it. So you have to get the money through the other tools, okay, that I've given you. I'm ordering you to spend, but I'm not directly providing you the money to spend. So this is called overt congressional financing, OCF. Okay, it's perfectly legal. Okay, it's perfectly constitutional. It would have one effect in Congress, however. That is, using this, you couldn't follow the pay-go system they have now. Good riddance to a terrible system that shackled economic legislation that was progressive since it was introduced in the 1980s.
Right.
Okay, that was just a travesty. It would get rid of the pay-go system, but what happened instead is the spending would come first, according to the needs of the population, funded in the way. And then Congress would take up the tax bills, and they would tax what they needed to tax and who they needed to tax to constrain any inflationary impact.
Right.
But first the spending would come, and then the taxing would come. And then the taxing would come with the realization that our country has to run deficits. It has to run sizable deficits, because at the federal level, there are leakages of demand from the economy to two sources. One is the current account deficit, commonsensically the trade deficit. And the other is private sector savings that we all would like to do and that the federal government ought to facilitate. We know from statistical evidence from the past that the private sector savings desires, when the economy is going well in a typical year, are 6%, of GDP. We also know that our trading desires in such a good time would produce trade deficits of 6%, of GDP. As it happens, it's about the same percentage. Those two total to a demand leakage from the economy of 12% of GDP per year. That's the full employment deficit we ought to be running. Okay, Mr. Obama for a while was running deficits, of 10% or so. And people were saving. Savings in the private sector were very high during the first 2 or 3 years after the stimulus bill. But he tried to cut down on the deficits, a deliberate policy of constraining the deficits and reducing the deficits. So he got the deficits down to 3% and even a little below 3%. And in doing so, he actually was preventing the full recovery of the economy, and he was getting deficits down to 2.5% to 3% when he should have been running the 12% deficits that I spoke of to get a full employment type of economy.
Right.
So what's the difference when you turn the percentages into dollars? Well, last year, I believe our deficit was running $650 billion or something like that. We needed a deficit of something like 2.2 trillion. It was that short of the deficit spending we needed on the right kinds of targets for the right people, that far short. So we cry over Trump's tax cut bill he passed, which roughly increases the deficit by $150 billion a year, I believe. So that would raise the deficit to $800 billion a year. Still far short of the 2.2 trillion. Now notice what happens if we ran the deficit of $2 trillion and we constrained inflation. Because we contained inflation at the same time, in various ways. What would happen is the economy would expand not just by the 2.2 trillion, but by a multiplier of that. Most probably a multiplier, of 2 over that. So you would have a growth of GDP from 19.5 trillion to 23.5 trillion, which means what? It means the second year, the 12% deficit paid for by this language, by the way, and not by floating debt instruments. The 12% deficit is now a higher number. It's no longer like $2.2 trillion now. It might be like 2.5 or $2.5 trillion. Each year, the amount of money you can spend to maintain full employment would actually grow, and you can fund more and more of the programs that you have to fund. That's why you can pay for all the programs that you have down here, and you can also pay for the job guarantee. And for a living wage bill as well, and for health care, though health care would actually pay for itself.
Right.
Some people have speculated that the health care bill would save so much that it would actually be deflationary.
Right.
In which case, okay, if it were deflationary, you would need to spend more to make up for the savings. But that spending would not necessarily have to be paid for through taxation, through laying on any more taxes. But if you don't tax, it's important that the tax cuts be targeted on the right people.
Right.
Actually need the tax cuts, which of course is not the case now.
Right.
So anyway, I guess that's all I have to say for tonight. If you would at some time, if you would care to come back,
sure,
for a further interview at some time, I'd very much like to have you back. I'd like to give you a chance to refine your platform some, okay, and to absorb some of the things here and some of the things in the CFAR contract as well.
Mm-hmm.
So then I think it would be very good to talk again. Okay. I think you're a great candidate, okay, and I'd like to help you win.
Thank you.
You've got a support here, and I think you've got a number of supporters here, okay, in our audience too, okay, as well. And there might be some of them there, okay, who would like to work for you. I suspect that there are.
Yes. Thank you so much. I have really learned a lot, and I would love to come back. And I appreciate your support and your confidence in me. As I said, this is a journey for me, and by listening to what people have to say, their experiences and their expertise, I'm really finding a way that I can be a significant change agent and really move forward with policies that make a difference. So I appreciate everything I've learned tonight, and I will take that and refine my platform and implement a lot of what you said. So thank you.
Okay, and if you need to talk to me on any of these issues, okay, we're friends now, okay, on Facebook. Okay, so we can arrange a conference, okay, at any time. If you want any clarification, okay, of any of these points, I'll be happy to help you out with it.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay, so have a great rest of Saturday night and recover fully from your flu.
Thank you. You have a great weekend too.
Okay, and you too. And I'll take you out of here now. Okay. Okay, so hi folks, I'm still here. I have not signed off. So, would you like me to answer any questions, okay, at this point, or entertain any comments? I know there are some of you who have hung in for this, and we're now still at 32 people, which is not bad after 2 hours and 17 minutes. Okay, John Ring says, great job, Lisa. Thank you, Joe. And thank you and Lisa John for coming on and spending so much time with me. I really appreciate it, and I hope we'll be doing it again soon. And Teresa Sanders says, we love her. And Keith Evans says, great live stream. Let her know the real progressive community is available to her. Well, thank you, Keith. I know she'll appreciate that. Dr. Joe, does she know about CFAR? She's a CFAR signator. She's a CFAR candidate, okay, already. That was one of the reasons why I wanted to interview her. And Carmen Muniz says, full economics and politics course, totally free. Thank you, RP and Dr. Joe. Well, thank you, Carmen. Yeah, we lost Lisa for about maybe 15 seconds or so. She came on fast. Mark Fabian says a number of guns in society is a problem. Mental health is a problem, but those are just symptoms of the infection of neoliberalism. Yes, Mark, I completely agree. But by the way, there are a lot of other countries where there's considerable mental illness. Australia, England, some other countries. But I'll tell you what, some of those countries have maybe 10 fatalities due to gun violence every year, and some have maybe 40 fatalities due to gun violence every year. And we have, I think in January, of 1981, already up to this point, we've lost something like 1,219 people in the first month of this year due to gun violence. If things should keep up, at that pace, we'll be running something like 15,000 fatalities for the year, compared to 10 and 40 and 50 in some countries where there may be no noticeable difference in the level of mental health in those countries as opposed to the level of health here in this country. In other words, all modern societies are subject to a fair amount of craziness because of the pace of change and the the new things that are happening all the time. Some of them very negative, and to discourage of neoliberalism as well. But it's quite clear that the kinds of solutions that involve gun control and the regulation of guns are quite effective in astronomically lowering the level of fatalities due to gun violence. So I'm all for mental health programs. I love mental health programs. I think they're a right, of every citizen. I think they're necessary, but they're not necessary for cutting gun violence down in the United States. So fatalities due to it are less than 100 per year. So let's not mistake how we take care of this problem. On the other hand, if the right wing wants to support a bunch of mental health problems, as well as agreeing to our gun control programs in order to control the fatalities, I'm all for that. I'm all for having mental health programs too. If they think that's the cause, I'm willing to accommodate them to spend a lot of money on mental health programs. And Deborah Kowenka, your wisdom never ceases to amaze me. Dr. Joe, thank you for being you and sharing your wisdom and knowledge with us. And thank you, Deborah. I do really like these kind of comments. I think that I'm going to heed my wife's call for my company once again and end shortly, but I want to remind you of two things. First, Real Progressives has a Patreon account. So please go to Patreon and consider making a small contribution to Real Progressives if you can afford it. And I have a Patreon account also. So please go to my Patreon account, and you can find a button to get to my Patreon account. That's at my website, www.josephmfirestone.com. And there you can find the button, okay, on any page, and you can click through and it will take you to Patreon. And please consider making a small contribution to my account on a monthly basis. Again, if you can afford it. I know that it's difficult but for some people to do that. I mean, especially with everybody asking for contributions to their Patreons. And so Gigi says, will do. Keep reminding me about the Patreon. And I will, Gigi. I will. I will keep reminding everybody about it. So anyway, thank you all for coming. And thank you all for hanging in for so long. I hope you liked this broadcast. I certainly did. I think Lisa Ring is a fine candidate and one that I'm happy to support. So I'm going to say goodnight and sign out for now.